Bienvenido. Welcome to the Marta Empowers podcast. I am your host, Marta Villegas Miranda, an unafraid educator and advocate in higher education. As a first-generation student, you may have the opportunity to be the first in your family to study abroad, internationally in another country for a summer, semester, or even a year, and obtain college-level credit. Imagine the following scenarios. As a college student, learning Spanish in a coffee shop in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico, studying tropical ecology and conservation in Costa Rica, learning about anime, video games, and digital media at a Japanese university, or study architecture, religion, fashion, and food by spending a semester in Rome. All of these international experiences and more are available to you as a student through your study abroad office in college. As an academic advisor, I always encourage my students to study or even volunteer abroad to expand your worldview, develop foreign language skills, and potentially connect to career opportunities. For 12 years, I coordinated volunteer immersion trips to Bolivia and Mexico at Lewis University during spring or summer breaks. And in speaking with some of my students, they would reflect how educational these opportunities were for their personal growth and understanding of other cultures. I remember once a student studying to become an elementary teacher mentioned how traveling to Bolivia enhanced his understanding of his ELL, ESL students, how the experience of not knowing how to communicate in Spanish or Quechua in Bolivia opened his eyes, mind, and heart to find ways to be a more welcoming and embracing teacher in his classroom back in the United States. I am mindful not all students may have the opportunity to leave the country due to their immigration status or financial situation. Therefore, I highly recommend you to connect with your college service learning or volunteer office to learn about opportunities within the U.S., since it's one of the most culturally diverse countries in the world. In my first professional role in higher education, I coordinated service immersion trips across the country to build, repair homes in Appalachia, work with children on the Blackfeet Native American reservation, and drove a 15-passenger van filled with college students to the South, Alabama and Louisiana, for post-hurricane relief efforts with Habitat for Humanity. As you can see, traveling within the U.S. or abroad can be a very valuable, transformative experience, especially for college students who are discovering more about themselves while expanding their cross-cultural awareness and gaining new perspectives in life. I decided to focus this episode on the benefits of studying abroad and international education travel because first-generation students often have some of the lowest participation rates in these programs. Therefore, today I have invited a good friend, Mr. Luis Quijano, to talk about his study abroad international experience and how this has led to an amazing career and life as a seasoned international education leader. Luis A. Quijano is a committed advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion, with over 9 years of programmatic and managerial experience within the fields of international exchange and higher education. He is currently a senior program officer at the International Research and Exchange Board, IREX, and is in the process of launching a new U.S. Department of State sponsored program that attracts approximately 120 emerging global civil society changemakers and equips them with the expertise, skills, and resources to develop multi-sector approaches and build healthy and engaged communities in over 100 countries. Luis was also a 2-time Fulbright grantee in Porto Alegre, Brazil, overseeing and providing mentorship for 18 English teaching assistants. Prior to this work, Luis worked for the Office of International Education at Miami Dade College, where he worked to significantly increase global opportunities for over 160,000 students, staff, and administrators. Luis received a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science, International Studies, and Spanish from Loyola University Chicago in 2012. He shares a passion for languages with native Spanish and advanced Portuguese language skills and a desire to continue exploring others. It is my pleasure, un gusto, to welcome Luis to the Marta Empowers podcast. Bienvenido, Luis. Cuéntame, ¿quién es Luis?
Hola, Marta. Thank you so much. First of all, I am so honored to be on your podcast and be speaking to all of the students, staff, faculty, everyone who's listening to this incredible, empowering podcast that you've created. My name is Luis Quijano, pronouns he, him, his, and I am a hyphen, meaning I'm both Cuban and I'm American. I'm Cuban American. So I'm the first generation to be born in the United States. I'm the first generation to graduate from college. And I'm actually the first person ever in the history of my family to study abroad. So it's really an honor to speak about the importance of studying abroad in international education. In addition, I'm a proud member of the LGBTQ plus community. So to everyone listening, happy Pride Month. And I'm a staunch ally in the struggle for social justice and a passionate advocate for DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Soy hijo de Luis Alberto Quijano y Araceli Quijano. I was born and raised in Miami, Florida. And since this time, I've been on a journey to travel every inch of this world to continue my lifelong learning. I do want to take just a quick moment to acknowledge that talking about the importance of international education during a worldwide pandemic and a year of so much loss and grief can be perceived as counterintuitive, but I hope that you welcome this information with just an understanding that dreams don't stop during a crisis, and that now more than ever, tolerance, understanding, awareness, and love for others, regardless of country of origin, need to be promoted, talked about, and celebrated. So thank you, Marta, for having me join you today.
Yes, thank you for that beautiful welcome. And yes, happy Pride Month for all of our listeners. So Luis, tell me about your educational journey. And who inspired you?
Yes. So my educational journey might be familiar to some who are tuning in today. So it was kind of a mix of desperation, a little bit of chance, some fate, and even oddly some manipulation, right? So I'll explain a bit what that means. In regards to desperation, as I mentioned, I was born and raised in Miami, Florida. At the age of 17, my father passed away from cirrhosis of the liver. And this was right when I was about to enter my senior year at Miami Beach High School. So I was really pumped, excited, had this happen, and that kind of altered my path forever. So at that time, coincidentally, my brother was also finishing his active duty in the Navy, and he was returning to the US, moving to a small town named Charleston, Illinois, Central Illinois, cornfields, a really, really wonderful place. So that's kind of the chance. The chance in my life was my brother was at a point where he was also moving. So what happened? Fate brought us together. I moved with my brother to Charleston, Illinois, given the circumstances in Miami. And that is where I went to Charleston High School. I experienced some culture shock, to say the least, which is not only something you experience when you go overseas, but at times a very familiar experience when you change locations here in the US. And during this time, I was able to graduate high school. I finished and was very interested in, number one, removing myself from Charleston. I do love Charleston, but it was not somewhere I thought I would be forever. And number two, my top priority was getting to college. And so I had no idea where to begin. No one in my family had gone to college. So I was just kind of walking the halls, listening to where people were applying to school. Every now and then I'd check in with my advisor and be like, where do I begin? What is this FAFSA? What am I supposed to do here? So that's how that process started. I was very proactive. It was not an option. I was going to go to college. So it was more, how do I get through this process? And the manipulation component, that final component, I don't think that this was necessarily malicious. But this manipulation, I would say, was linked directly from the schools reaching out to me via email, to some guidance counselors pointing me in a certain direction, or to a certain college. At some point, it felt as though in a community that was predominantly Caucasian, in a rural community, me being Latino, I was a token. It felt that way, at least at times. And upon that, others were trying to kind of move. I was a number for the school. My success was something that many wanted for one reason or another. And so I just did my best. I went with it. I finally came across one guidance counselor who I really admired and liked, and he kind of walked me through the process. I applied to schools. How did I do that? I just applied to anywhere that didn't ask for an essay, which is a really bad way to start that process. But again, I had no idea. And so my only inspiration was not a who, but a what. And it was just to find stability. And so stability kind of empowered me to just apply. I applied to 5 institutions. I got accepted to 4, waitlisted to 1, and Loyola offered me the largest financial aid package. And so that was my journey.
Yeah, and I commend you, Luis, for your persistence in trying to get your education. And I think this is a very true experience for a lot of first-generation students. It's a very overwhelming experience. Students don't know who to go to. They don't have anyone in their family. So I think your story is really going to resonate with a lot of our first-generation listeners who may not understand how to even start the process. So thank you for sharing that. What did you study in college and why?
So at Loyola, I studied, I got a bachelor's in international studies, political science, and Spanish, a triple major. That was not my intention, but it's something I'm very proud of. I actually started studying, I started off my college career studying political science and Spanish, and that was after a full semester of being undecided. Why did I do this? I had absolutely no idea what else I should study. I knew that I loved listening to the news, and I also knew that I understood immigration and political differences a little bit better than most, just because I grew up in Miami, where we often refer Miami as the capital of Latin America. I grew up in a Cuban household, surrounded by Cuban immigrants, with people who, of course, many were exiled from a country or had to flee from their home country. So I understood political differences and how that could take shape or affect the lives of others. So for me, that seemed like a really good place to start. Political science, okay, I like that. And then I spoke Spanish. And so for me, if I could tag on Spanish, great. So that's how I actually started my career at Loyola, was political science and Spanish major. The reason I added international studies was by chance and directly due to my study abroad experience. It's because by the time I had completed these courses, and in addition to what I studied overseas, I was able to get an international studies major. And so I triple dipped. And that just means take one class that'll count for several majors. And that is how I was able to complete in 4 years a triple major in international studies, political science, and Spanish.
Wow. So I know you've answered part of this question. So why did you choose to study abroad and where did you travel to?
Great question. So I chose to study abroad, honestly, because I had never experienced a very long flight. And I know that sounds absurd, but I had only ever been on an airplane for the first time when I was 15 years old. And I know that's also a very privileged thing to do and to say. But for me, I had always dreamed of going on this long flight. I just thought it would be so fun and so comfortable, and just airplane food and all these things that really, for some reason, at that time in my life, really made me excited to pursue a study abroad opportunity. And so I don't regret that. I think it's a funny reason now, having gone on many international flights and realizing how uncomfortable they are. But at that time, it really drove me to reach out to the study abroad advisors, the International Education Office, and to just take a seat and say, hey, I know I'm new around here, but this is going to happen for me. Can we talk about how I can get started in that process? So I did end up studying abroad my sophomore year, first semester. That also was not planned. I went to my study abroad advisor second semester freshman year, and I sat down and I said, as I mentioned, this is happening. How do I get started? I don't have money, but this is going to be something that I do. So we kind of talked through the options. At that time, I learned about these consortium agreements, or these agreements, these partnerships that universities or colleges have with other US colleges or universities, or even international colleges and universities, and how, by attending Loyola, I could somehow be also attending Marquette, and somehow through that interaction be able to get tuition waived, or the same tuition as I would pay in the US for going to a university in Madrid. And so at that time, Loyola had a partnership with Marquette University in Wisconsin, and Marquette allowed for Loyola students to participate in their direct agreement with Universidad Complutense in Madrid. And in return, Loyola would allow Marquette students to go to their campuses in Beijing and also in Rome. So this was something that, had I not sat down and asked, who would have known? I mean, I definitely did not know that extent, or what that was, or how that happens. And I was so excited to find out about this opportunity through Marquette, because it was actually the same exact price as studying at Loyola. And so I was like, I'm doing it. This is perfect. What was the problem? It was the last semester that partnership was going to exist. And so I said, well, can I apply now? And she said, well, it's a month past the deadline. And I said, well, can I apply now? And she said, we can try. And so I actually did apply a month past the deadline. I was accepted, and I was able to go to Marquette that very next semester. That was not what I planned when I walked into that office, but that's what resulted as of that, from that communication.
Again, persistence. Even if a deadline had passed, you're like, no, can I apply
stop.
right now? No, don't stop. Wonderful. So how many college credits did you earn on that semester abroad, and what type of classes did you take?
So I took a full course load. I took, I believe it was either 15 or 18 credit hours. So that's 5 or 6 classes. That included Spanish cinema, Miguel Cervantes. I love Don Quixote. And actually, Alonso Quijano is the name of the character Don Quixote, which was something that made that class very enjoyable, because the professor always gasped when he saw my last name was Quijano, just like Don Quixote. And then I also took classes about politics, so European political systems, Spanish government, and I did take a Spanish grammar class, because maybe someone out there listening can agree. I grew up speaking Spanish and English at the same time, and grammar in either language for me has always been a big struggle, because I knew it. One day I woke up and I knew how to speak. I never actually went through the process of learning the language. And so I took a Spanish grammar class, which was very difficult, and it was great. And as I had mentioned, taking these classes about politics in an international setting and in Spanish is what resulted in me having that triple major.
I know this question may be in the minds of many students. How did you pay for your semester abroad? It sounds very expensive. Can students fundraise or use college financial aid to pay?
Yes. It is expensive. Yes, college or studying abroad can be expensive. Though, as I mentioned, in my experience, it can actually be the same price as of what you're paying currently, or even cheaper, especially if you are attending a private institution or you're paying out-of-state tuition. So what I recommend is go see your advisor and go see the director of financial aid. So my challenge to anyone listening to this podcast is going to be, I challenge you to not pay for your study abroad experience, or at the very least, to not pay for most of it. And what does that mean? It means find other people to pay for this experience for you. It exists. There are dozens of opportunities to apply for both internal. So within your institution, they do have funds to facilitate these kinds of activities. There is federal, that's federal aid through FAFSA for those who have access to FAFSA and federal aid. It can actually be used to help you facilitate your study abroad process, depending on, like I talked about, those partnerships, what's overseas institution. There are ways you can find out which institutions your aid can help in supporting the cost. And then there's external scholarships. These are, for me, the most important. Many of them do not take into account your immigration status. Many of they do not care. They are there to help facilitate international exchanges. That is what they are there for. Some examples are, Benjamin Gilman's scholarship. There's a fund for education abroad. There's critical language scholarship. There's Boren scholarship, Rotary, International, Hispanic Scholarship Fund, Diversity Abroad. This list can go on and on. And the best way to have that list available to you is to visit your international education office or your study abroad office and to tap on that door of financial aid office to make sure that you have a good awareness and knowledge of everything that is available to you. Because yes, money is a factor, but it should not stop you from studying abroad. And I'm, as someone who worked in international education and someone who worked in higher education, I really challenge my students to make sure that you find the opportunity and that you try your best for someone to pay for it for you.
And those are wonderful websites that you just listed. So if you can share those with me so I can put them on the show notes, that way students have access to those scholarships. Now, this reminds me, so it sounds like to study abroad, you're going to have to spend time researching scholarships and programs. I know for you it was a very easy, quick application process, but what's the time period? When do you think students should be thinking and planning to study abroad if that's one of their options in college?
You start as soon as possible. There's no harm in finding out information as soon as you can. Even if you have that information, you're aware, and you go 2 years later, a year later, or the following semester. But getting that information is critical as soon as possible because in my example, had I not gone at that very time, that partnership would no longer have existed if I had waited for the following semester. In addition, in terms of committing to this process, making sure that you can, it's a time commitment. Yes, it's an effort commitment. Yes, you may have to apply for scholarships. You may have to prove why these funds should go to you, why this experience for you is going to duplicate efforts across your community, across your institution, across your family. It's a time commitment. And I would always tell my students, put in the work. You'd have the students come to me and say, another essay. And I would respond, did you realize that for that essay, for that 2 hours, that 3 hours, let's say 4 hours, you could potentially make $1,000 or $5,000 or $10,000. If you do the math, I would say that that is the best paying job I've heard of. And so it is important to invest in yourself and to invest in your future because other people are not expecting you to do that. So it's really critical that you put in that time, that effort, and apply. Just apply as soon as you can.
Yeah, and a lot of campuses will help you review your college essay, your scholarship essay. So yes, don't be afraid of the essay. And I always tell students, I've been on scholarship committees, that your essay is your chance to tell that committee why you deserve the scholarship. And just like Luis said, it could pay off big time because you're going to spend 2 hours in an essay, but you might get a $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 scholarship for your school in general or to study abroad. I know students can also study abroad at the community college. And so I know I had several students who went to the study abroad office, and as soon as they applied and got accepted, there were scholarship grants. They were looking for students, money to give away to students to study abroad. So because there were not many students interested. And that's why I wanted to do this episode, because first generation students are often least likely to participate in these programs, which can be so transformative to a young student's life. So yes, so thank you for sharing that. Do you have
Martha,
any? Yes, go ahead.
If I could just comment on that, as someone who worked at a community college in the international education department, I really want to highlight what you just said. Studying abroad is for anyone, not only those at a four-year institution or a four-year college. Community college students can study abroad. They should be encouraged to study abroad. It can fit within your 2-year time frame in that associate's degree. It should not hold you back. All of these things can be true. And so there are many different ways to study abroad. There are 6-month long, semester long. There are also short-term, high-impact programs. That could be 1 week in Costa Rica or 2 weeks. Please reach out to your study abroad office, your international education office, particularly if you're at a community college. And I challenge you to challenge them. If there's not something created and curated to you, that's something that office really needs to work on. So don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to push back and challenge. As administrators of universities and colleges, we are there to serve you. You are the student. You are our clients. And so therefore, if something does not exist, it's a perfect opportunity to get that started. At my institution, we try to be as innovative as possible and as inclusive as possible. So we try to launch a study abroad specific to veterans. Yes, veterans have options to study abroad as well. Why not? We did it for students who are housing insecure. That is also an opportunity that needs to exist to these individuals, because why not? So when these opportunities are not currently available, make them. Encourage the school or the university to build these.
Yes, and at the community college, it can be a lot more affordable to participate in the study abroad experience. And I encourage you first to talk to your academic advisor so you can plan the study abroad experience in your educational plan while you're in college. And then research and talk to the study abroad advisor, who will provide you with a list of programs that are offered at that college. And if they're not there, like Luis said, why not offer or encourage them to offer a study abroad experience in another part of the world? So yes, students, I encourage you to speak up and to get involved. Do you have any interesting or aha study abroad moments that you'd like to share?
I think there's so many. I mean, I spent 5 months in Spain, and it was wonderful. I think I talked a bit about getting there. Another thing was being there, right? So I was, for a good part of the program, pretty broke, I would say. So my money. I got really excited when I arrived. I booked some flights to make sure I could go places all around Europe. If you know about Europe and flights, they can be very affordable. So when I say I booked a ton of flights, just know that it was within a pretty decent budget. And so what had happened is I did all that as soon as I arrived, which the only negative to that was when these flights actually arrived, I had no more money. So I specifically remember during spring break, I had booked about 5 flights, but I was down to very little euros. So I actually got on this flight, which then took me to Ibiza and then took me to, all these really wonderful places. But by the time I got to my last location, which was Milan, I'll never forget my first time there, I had no more money. And so this was not good planning. I do not recommend that. Please plan in advance while you are overseas. Thankfully, I had started to teach English to someone who I had actually met through my host family. And so that was really nice way to make some additional euros. But all to say, by the time I got to Milan, I was down to probably 40 euros for a week. And so this was when I was introduced to couch surfing out of necessity. Again, couch surfing, if you don't know, it's essentially a website. You can apply and ask to stay on someone's couch. This could be absurd for most people listening. For some people listening, it's pretty frightening, especially when you're by yourself. And I was doing it. I went through with it, again, because of necessity, but it turned out to be one of the most rewarding experiences that I've ever had. Again, if you're listening, please make sure that you do your proper research and know that this is not for everyone. There are other options. But for me, this was something that at that time I did. I did not only once, but twice, because the first time around was so wonderful. And I had the opportunity to stay with 2 families in Milan and around Milan for the week. Not only did they host me, but they provided me with meals. And it was just so great to be sitting at a dinner table with an Italian family and just talking about anything and everything, and have them question me about my life in the US, and I could ask them about their life in Italy. And so those small organic conversations really contribute to your overall experience overseas. You'll often hear that your study abroad experience is what you make it. And so in this specific situation, I chose to be very open, transparent, vulnerable in this position. And I really rewarded, I had a wonderful time. And funny enough, a couple of years later, when I returned to the US, one of my hosts, Olivier, we actually saw him on Project Runway. So he had made it all the way to a TV show. And it was so great because when I stayed with him, he was showing me his clothing that he was creating in Milan. And it was just this crazy moment years later after I graduated when I turned on a TV show and here is Olivier from Milan. And so that was something that we still, my friend and I we stayed together in that second home. We celebrate that. We love it. I'm no longer in touch with Olivier, but I wish I were. I think he's doing amazing things right now. That's what it sounds like. So that was an experience that I really, really enjoyed.
I think I always, when I would speak to my students upon their return, that it helps you to understand what it means to be quote unquote American around the world, right? That if you don't leave the United States, you don't really have the opportunity to experience another culture, another language, and just have that educational moment with people around the world that, US Americans, are very unique and they're very diverse in their experience and their political thoughts. So I always would tell my students that you're an ambassador of this country and we're essentially teaching people around the world the variety of different individuals that exist in our country. And I know sometimes they're like, you're from the United States? I'm like, yes, and I speak, two languages. And so I think, it's a good learning experience, learning exchange between that country and someone coming from the United States, because a lot of Americans, quote unquote, don't travel outside of the US. So I don't think a lot of people around the world know or had the opportunity to connect or speak with someone from the United States. They think that we look like the people on TV. We look like people from, 90210. I know I'm dating myself, but, or The Simpsons, right? They learn about the United States through TV shows and media. So when you travel, you have this opportunity to teach them that we are diverse and very unique individuals.
I agree, Marta. And as you mentioned at the very beginning of this, not everyone will have the opportunity, the privilege to travel overseas. This very same experience can happen here within your own community. So having those conversations, sharing diversity doesn't have to be done only through an international experience. For all intents and purposes, you can actually study abroad by going to another community within the US. And even though it's not abroad, you may experience many of the same things that you will when you do travel overseas.
I know right now a lot of the study abroad programs may have paused, but now is a good time to start researching, because when we do go back to quote unquote normal, there might be opportunities for you to travel. So I know right now you may not have that chance to travel abroad, but now is a good time to research scholarships and different programs. You are a recipient of the prestigious Fulbright program, an educational exchange program for recent graduates and young professionals. So congratulations on being selected not only once, but twice. Why did you apply, and what did you learn as a Fulbright Scholar?
Thank you, Marta. I appreciate that. So yeah, as you mentioned, I served as a Fulbright ETA. So that's an English teaching assistant. And then I returned as a Fulbright ETA mentor for a second year. And so when you go to the question about why I applied, I guess it was because I wanted to see how far I could go. It was more of a personal goal. I applied to Fulbright actually when I was 27, which is a lot older of an age than when most people might consider applying for an ETA position. I had already worked full time for a couple of years. I'd been in the field of international education for so long, facilitating these exchanges. And so at this point in my life, I said, you know what? Now I'm going to go. I'm going to participate in that, and I'm going to see how I can have an impact overseas. So at that point in my life, it was a very personal decision to see how far I could go. I have always known that international education is going to be a focus of my career. Marta and I, we've had the pleasure of working together, and I've always really appreciated having international perspective and having an international focus. So much so that I left that position that the same company we're working for, a nonprofit, because I knew that ultimately I wanted to work more in the international sphere. So that's why I applied. I just wanted to see how far I could go. And living overseas for an extended amount of time, the Fulbright was for 9 months, was something that I was very interested in, because it's not just go, see, and leave. It's actually go, explore, experiment, live, and then have a chance to see what I can do with the knowledge learned when I return. Some things that I learned. Number one, I love Brazil. I'm currently having this podcast. I am currently in Brazil as I am doing this podcast. My relationship with Brazil has only grown since that time. Some really valuable things that I learned as a Fulbright ETA is number one, I learned more about Brazil and South America, learned about the people, the culture, the values. Remember, I had only studied abroad in Europe, so that was Madrid, and studying and coming to Latin America is a whole different experience. So that really, you can see how this, they say you have that travel bug, because when you visit different locations, you begin to see how different places are, how much there is to be celebrated, but then also fundamentally how similar people are, how similar experiences can be. So I would say that there are two really, really critical things that I learned as a Fulbrighter. Number one was the role of the United States in South America's current realities. And for me, that was a very external process. That was something I was reading about, I was listening. It was something that was outside of me, but that I was taking in the information and grasping. And then the second thing was a deeper understanding of my own privilege. And that there was definitely an internal process. So when I arrived to Brazil, I did have to confront perceptions and perspectives regarding the United States, many that I did not encounter in Europe. Right. So it was fascinating to be a Fulbright ETA, so sponsored by the US Department of State, representing the United States, making connections here in Brazil, and being questioned about my role within this, why are you here in Brazil? What is the purpose of you being here? Being questioned about the role of the US and many of the current realities being faced in South America. Things that I, up until that point, maybe have studied in a book, but had not confronted in person, which was a really, really beautiful and profound experience. I learned that it's really important to actively listen and to reflect. I am very proud to be from the United States of America, but in that pride, it's important to realize and acknowledge what comes with that, the burden, at times burden, but also just the realities that come into play when you're talking about the U.S. role within the world. So I learned that no one wants to be saved, no one needs to be saved. People want to be listened to. So kind of dismantling that savior complex is really, really important if you're planning to study abroad, and especially if you plan to invest your career in international education. So that's the role of the US. And then the second thing that I talked about was also very profound and difficult, which was learning to recognize my own privilege. And I would say that that's something that's ongoing. It's a very difficult and uncomfortable process, but really important process in my personal opinion. I had to learn that my struggles in my life were very real. So I grew up in a poor community. I grew up in an unstable household, multiple evictions. I had moments of homelessness. There was a lack of resources, lack of support. I know what it feels like to not go on a field trip because your parents didn't have $10, or to wear all of your family's hand-me-downs. And I was always very proud of that, but I also know that it left a bit of trauma and a bit of impact in my life, so much so that it really helps me to never want to go back to those moments. And that's something that does empower me, going back to that stability. But I also realize that although these things are true, I still benefit from many privileges, given what I look like, given who I am, and given where I was born. So for me, knowing that I was born in the US, knowing that the color of my skin is white, that's something that I learned what that actually means. And for me, that was something that maybe I had an idea about, but going overseas, living in other communities, living with different people, cultures, that's something that really begins to make sense. Again, it's very uncomfortable, but it's a very healthy process. It's very eye-opening, and it empowers you in a way to realize, like, this is who I am. This is what I was born with. What am I going to do with this power, with this privilege, to help others who potentially woke up one day, took their first breath, and it wasn't in the United States of America? And so that's something that really drives me in the work that I do on a daily basis. And I'm really excited to continue that. And I think my experience with Fulbright only fortified that entire learning process.
Yes, and that's very profound for you to recognize and share. So thank you for sharing that, because I think sometimes when it's these international experiences, when you're left out of your comfortable situation, that you begin to realize other parts of yourself, other parts of your identity, other parts of your privilege, that yes, your privilege, if you're born in the United States, that you can travel to, I don't know, I think it's one of the most powerful passports in the world. You can go to 150 some countries, but yet if you're born in another country, you might not have that same privilege. So I think that that's a very profound and important point that you make, because I think that's important as first generations. Yes, we have maybe gone through some traumatic experience, but yet being born in this country does afford some of these privileges that you just mentioned.
Right, and those two things they can both be true. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. And so, yes, you may have lived a very difficult life. That is true. That is acknowledged. That is valued. but also there are some things that you may be naturally benefiting from within society. And that's also true and valuable and acknowledged.
Your career has centered around international education and inclusion. Why is international education important today?
So this is a good question. I think it simply comes down to because for too long it just has not been. And so although the diversity of study abroad students and the participation has increased in recent years, minority students, as we, in the perspective of a US perspective, minority students are still really underrepresented in study abroad. And that trend is also true for international educators, not only for students participating in exchanges. So I have some quotes here. According to NAFSA, which is the National Association for International Educators, as of 2018 to 2019, 68.7% of students that were going abroad were Caucasian. African Americans or Black only made up for 6.4%. Asian Pacific Islanders, 8.9%. Hispanic Latino, 10.9%. Multiracial, 4.7%. American Indian, Alaska Native, 0.4%. So within those percentages, it is also true that about 2/3 are female. So all in all, to say that the realities of studying abroad is that it is being taken advantage of by mostly Caucasian women, and that's not something that's a negative whatsoever. But there's definitely room for growth. There's definitely room to include more individuals, to diversify the participants that are going abroad. And interestingly enough, within that, an overwhelming amount of students who do go abroad, I believe it's 40% of students, are just going to 5 countries. And that's the UK, Italy, Spain, France, and Germany. And so all to say that the entire process from beginning to end can go through some growth, some diversity, some equity, some inclusion. The beauty of being first generation in the US and participating in a study abroad program is that you are bicultural, biracial, multicultural, multiracial. And as Marta said earlier, you can share multiple cultures with those who you're interacting with overseas. So you can help to actually foster a more accurate representation of what it means to be from the United States of America. And I think that's really key.
Yes. So any final advice to first-generation students listening to your story today?
Yes, thank you for listening. I have loved this experience so far. If you're still listening, I appreciate you. I hope that you're finding some of my personal experiences to be valuable. And there are some things that I would like to comment on before we end this podcast. As a first generation student listening to this story, there are going to be some things that you face or that you navigate that maybe others around you don't in terms of studying abroad or considering studying abroad. So there's 3 really important things I want to talk about. Number 1 is confronting or navigating the immigrant experience, right? So you may be in a position where you're going to encounter major pushback from your family, just given the reality and the fact that they may have immigrated to the United States. So for many, they sacrificed so much, they gave up so much to get to this country. And now you get home really excited after talking to your advisor and your financial aid, and you say, I'm leaving this country. And you can imagine the immediate shock that comes with that. Well, I gave up everything to get here, and you're talking about leaving. Even if it's for a short amount of time, that can be perceived in maybe a negative way. And that's something that I think is very specific to first generation students is confronting that immigrant experience and just making sure that process, that experience that your family members have is valid and yours is also equally as valid. So for me personally, my study abroad experience was what I made it. And in my experience, it was an opportunity to connect deeper with my roots and to understand my family's history just a bit more. And I do think that's unique to the immigrant community. The second thing is defending the legitimacy or credibility of a study abroad experience as an academic experience. I think this kind of goes hand in hand with the first. It's just an additional punch, right? Like, I don't want you to leave this country. Also, that's just traveling. You're not going to learn from that. Well, that's not true, right? And so given what I just mentioned, it's also pretty common to face this kind of skepticism about the value of international programs. And as I had mentioned earlier, today more than ever, employers are investing in diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you don't believe me, look it up. Look at any of the job listings you want. Look at DEI, look at diversity, look at equity, look at inclusion. You'll be shocked to see the amount of job openings that are currently available, because this is a priority for nonprofit organizations, for for-profit organizations, for big companies, small companies. Everyone is finally recognizing the importance of investing in diversity, equity, and inclusion and justice. So your study abroad experience is valuable. It's going to allow you to interact with other cultures and values and expressions and perspectives that will make you more valuable to an organization. So this is something that you want to keep in mind. It's investing in yourself and investing in your future. And then that final thing is just embracing the hyphen. I started this off with expressing that I am a hyphen, right? I'm Cuban American. Unique to our communities, our first generation communities, is just that you have to be prepared to confront that hyphen. And particularly for those who are choosing to study abroad in a region or a country where your family may be coming from, where your family originates. Maybe you've never been and you're going for the first time. So you may actually never be American enough in the US, and you may not be Cuban enough in Cuba, or Mexican enough in Mexico, or Haitian enough in Haiti. And so you might find yourself in a place where you don't feel you belong to one place totally or to another totally. And that is okay, because you belong to both. And so you are that hyphen. And just leaving with final pieces of advice to everyone listening is to be resilient and to be resourceful. And I think the beauty of that is that as first generation in this country, we tend to be both already. We have gone through certain instances that potentially others have not. And we are, I would say, more, at times you find yourself finding these qualities to be more natural to you. So the ability to be resilient, be resourceful. So don't take no for an answer. If a university or college doesn't have that program that suits you, well, help to build it. So maybe not demand that it's done, but you can help to build it. At least it will be available for someone else in the future. If the funds don't exist for you to study abroad, then search every single avenue possible to secure those funds. And there's nothing more beautiful than being lost in a city where you are totally anonymous. And so for me, that means continue to explore the world, explore your roots, explore your identity, and just think about the legacy you hope to leave behind for others.
I hope students listening will consider studying abroad or even volunteering across the country as part of their college journey. The world is our classroom waiting for you to arrive. Thank you. Muchas gracias, Luis. It has been a pleasure speaking with you today. Fue un placer. Muito obrigada.
Obrigada eu.
Muchas gracias por escuchar. Thank you for listening. This episode was produced by the Marta Empowers podcast team. The theme song, El Barrio, is composed and produced by Edwin Miranda. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, leave a comment, and share with others so together, juntos, we can change, transform, and empower our comunidad. Follow us on social media, #MartaEmpowers. If there is a topic or question you'd like for me to discuss on a future episode, please send me a message or tag me on Facebook or Instagram. To contact us, you can send an email to martaempowers@gmail.com. In the meantime, siga adelante y échale muchas ganas. Nos vemos pronto. Adiós. Ciao.